cause that be natural.
Lady
I ain't
D.
looking tacky. I keep my game tactful.
Yo.
Yeah, I'm so nappy.
M.O.B.
Cause that be natural.
The infamous.
I ain't looking tacky cause I keep my game tactful.
I'm so pretty, I'm so fat, boo. I'm so natural, it's like it's a taboo. I'm so filthy, got the tattoo stuck in these bitches like I own ragu. On my business with my platoon, getting these minutes like I'm a typhoon. Y'all this jersey on that cartoon and I'm sitting on top.
Hey guys, and welcome back to Afros and Baby Hairs, and thank you for joining me once again in the reading room for book review number 28 on Long Live the Cartel by Ashley and JaQuavis. So if you're interested in hearing details as well as my thoughts and opinions on this book, then please keep on watching.
I am not and do not promote or encourage anyone who is under the age of 18 to read this book. If you are under the age of 18, please get your parents' consent and or supervision before reading this book. Now that I've gotten that out of the way, let's get into this book review.
So I'm going to start off by reading the back of the book. And it reads, "In the world of the cartel, there are many pitfalls and family curses. In the city of Miami, the good die young and the bad live forever. The first family of Miami, the Diamonds, are back and more ruthless than ever. When the family has to deal with the sins of the father, karma comes back and rests on the shoulders of Carter C.J. Jones too. The life his father never wanted for him calls him, and the allure of the family tradition sucks him in so deep that he falls victim to the game. This story shows the second coming of a king and solidifies the cartel family tree and the roots of the streets forever. Ride with the new regime as Carter II and his cousin Mo attempt to carry the legacy of their fathers on their shoulders. Will the city respect them, or have the ghosts of the past been erased by a new wave of hustlers? Miami was forever changed when Carter and Mee Mee came to town. Can the cartel ever regain their strength, or was their fall from power too devastating to repair? Ashley and JaQuavis dive into their franchise series once more and give their fans a taste of a classic urban storytelling." That is the back of the book. Now we're going to go into the characters, and many of these characters are in the previous Cartel series, the Murder Mama series, and a few others. But anyway, the characters are Mee Mee, who is the head of the Murder Mamas. She's also Carter Jones Sr.'s wife and CJ's mom, and also Ashton's trainer. So Ashton is from the actual Devil's Money One, who is Matisse' niece. Then we have Carter Jones, or Carter C.J. Jones. He is the son of Mee Mee and Carter Jones Sr. He was adopted by Estes. He's a reigning champ in boxing, and he is also Mo's first cousin as well as Breeze's nephew. Mo is Carter Jones Sr.'s nephew. He's Carter Jones Jr.'s cousin. He's Estes' great-grandson. He is also Mecca's son, and right now he is the head of the cartel. Estes is the guardian of Carter Jones Jr. He's Mo's great-grandfather, Breeze's grandfather. He's kingpin out of the Dominic, and he runs Miami. Joey is Mo's right hand. They linked up in juvie and been tight ever since. Pappy is Carter Jones Jr.'s trainer. Ashton is Mee Mee's ex-cellmate and Matisse's niece. Tay is Mo's worker that stole from him. Einstein is the Diamond family lawyer. Breeze is Estes' granddaughter, and she is Mo's and Carter Jr.'s aunt. She's also Aurora's mom, and she is Carter Diamond's only daughter. She is also the ex-wife of Zaire. And Aurora is Estes' great-granddaughter, Breeze's daughter, Carter Jr. and Mo's first cousin. Juan Miguel is the head of the Sinaloa cartel, one of the 5 families. Harry is one of Juan's men on Ocean Drive. The Five Families are a group of men who control the drug exports out of the country. Christy is Aurora's new friend and also Guy's sister. Aries is a member of the Murder Mamas, and she is also Mia Moore and Breeze's right-hand chick. Loudmouth Carter Jr. knocked out at a pool party. Guy is Christy's brother and Aurora's new friend, and as well as Medea's worker. Renetta Pollard, aka Medea, is an older woman that gave young hustlers from the Pork and Bean Projects a way to eat. Tar is one of Medea's workers. Juice is one of Riz's workers, or Charisma's workers. Nas is a farmer who supplied Carter Jr. with fresh produce. Jackson is Medea's son. Zaire is Aurora's dad and Breeze's ex, as well as he used to be Carter Sr.'s right-hand man, and that is Carter Jones Sr. Kai is Zaire's new wife, and I think I forgot to mention Charisma. Charisma is the head of this gang of killers called the Wolves. He is also a party promoter, and he is one of Ashton's friends. So now that we have the characters, we're gonna start on the book. Starts off in Mia Moore's cell in the middle of the night. She was used to the guards doing walkthroughs, but this particular night was different because the guards stopped right at her cell. At first she couldn't see his face, and soon she realized it was her late husband, Carter Jones. He had on a guard's uniform and was motioning her to be quiet. Their eyes met, and both of them eventually began embracing and making out. Mia Moore wanted to ask him how did he escape death, but she didn't want to waste this precious time asking questions. After a few minutes of making out, when it was time to take it to the next level, Mia Moore realized she was having a wet dream. Once she woke up, she began crying because she truly missed her husband. Carter Jr. was in Miami training for the biggest fight of his career. Estes and Pappy, his trainer, was there, as well as all of the media outlets and their reporters, filming, taking pictures, and waiting to interview CJ. After finishing a 4-hour practice round with Pappy, Estes sat in the middle of the ring eating peanuts and told Carter Jr. he was slow. Then he told Pappy to give him the gloves. That's when Carter Jr. and Estes began to go round for round, and Estes knew how to bring the gorilla out of Carter Jr., which was his stage name that Carter Jr. was given anyway, Gorilla. Estes called him CJ, which was the push Carter Jr. needed to remind him what he came from and what he was really fighting for. After his round with Estes, Carter Jr. answered some of the reporters' questions, and then the next thing you know, Estes was shot. Ashton was posted in the cut. She was ordered by Mia Moore to take out Estes. Mia Moore and Ashton were cellmates for 4 years, and during that time, Mia Moore had trained her to protect CJ. Mia Moore wanted Estes dead because she felt like Estes was still holding grudges about Mia Moore taking out his daughter, and wasn't sure what all CJ had to endure while staying with Estes. She also didn't like the fact that Estes was fighting her son like an animal. Anyway, Ashton did the job, packed up her things, and slipped out of Dodge. Mo had broken into one of his workers named Tay's home. He was in the baby's nursery watching the little baby sleep until the baby woke up mildly crying. The baby monitor picked up the cry. However, Mo grabbed the baby to comfort her and sat down in the rocking chair. Soon the mother entered the room to comfort her baby and was shocked to see Mo rocking her baby with gun in hand. He basically directed the woman to call her dude and make him come home without giving any indication that she was in danger. After the woman made the call, Mo handed her baby and held them both at gunpoint for about an hour and a half when Tay showed up. Mo ended up blowing the lady's brains out because when he asked Tay where was the money he had stolen from him, Tay lied and told Mo it wasn't like that. But after Mo shot his baby mama, Tay pulled up the floorboard where he was stashing the bread, and that's when Mo shot him filled the baby bag with cash, put the baby in a car seat, and left her on the neighbor's doorsteps. Then he hopped in the convertible with Joey and they dipped. Once they peeled off, Mo got a call from Einstein informing him of his great-grandfather's death and told him they needed to set up a meeting pronto. Mo never got a chance to make amends with Estes, but always wanted to. He always wanted to know why he left him in the system, but came back and got Carter Jr. Now he felt like he would never get that chance, so he was uneasy and ended up telling Joey to pull over so that he could get out of the whip to vomit. Mo eventually pulled himself together. Soon he realized that he was the last one standing with Estes's bloodline and knew that everything his great-grandfather had was now his. Breeze and her daughter Aurora, who was now 14, arrived at Einstein's office for the meeting. Carter Jr. was already there. She was shocked at how much CJ looked like Carter. Carter Jr. also met Aurora and told her he would get her some Yeezys. Later, Mo arrived with his entourage that he later had to dismiss before the meeting started. Basically, Einstein read Estes's will, leaving Carter Jr. $100 million and the estates, and leaving Mo and Breeze and Aurora $10 million apiece. But Mo said that Aurora could have his money. He wanted Estes's connects. That's when Einstein left the meeting. He didn't want to be a part of the details of the drug operation. Breeze tried to talk Mo out of it, but knew that he wouldn't listen because Mo was after the crown. After a while, Carter Jr. told Mo that he would take him to the Dominic and introduce him to all of Estes's connects because he knew them all very well. Carter Jr., Mo, and Pappy landed in the Dominic and were greeted by all of Carter Jr.'s fans. They had gotten word that Carter Jr. would be arriving. Pappy was used to the reaction of the fans, but he was glad to be back home since they hadn't been back in a few years. But Mo was amazed and saw how the people of the Dominic looked at Carter Jr. as a king. Pappy really wasn't feeling Mo, so he gave him the side eye. When the gentleman exited the plane, Carter Jr. gave his fans autographs, and they got into two black sedans that were waiting. Mo and Carter Jr. got into one and Pappy into the other. They were driven to Santo Domingo, and from there they had to walk a long path. Along the way, Carter Jr. was having regrets about connecting Mo because Mo didn't seem to respect the Spanish culture. Pappy was also thinking that the five families wouldn't accept Mo because he was so arrogant, cocky, and flashy. So Pappy was giving Mo the side eye again. Only this time Mo called him and the men had words. Pappy was a trained boxer, but out of respect for Carter Jr., he let it go. Mo sent out threats and took Pappy backing out as weakness. The men squashed it and continued walking until they came up on the festival that was taking place. Once in the midst of the festivities, a man whistled to get their attention to come inside a domino club. They were patted down and led downstairs to where Juan Miguel, head of the Sinaloa cartel, was sitting playing a game of dominoes with two other men. He greeted Carter but never took his eyes off of the game. Anyway, Carter Jr. and Juan talked, but Juan wasn't going to allow Mo to take over for Estes. He told Carter Jr. that it would have to be him or nothing. Mo was trying to get Carter Jr. to roll with it, but Carter Jr. had no intentions of coming into the cartel. However, before Carter Jr. could answer Juan, he ended the conversation and told Carter Jr. he had 30 days to decide, and if he decided, he didn't need to come back there, but to go meet with his man Harry on Ocean Drive. Clearly, Mo was upset that Carter didn't take the order for him. Ashton, Mia Moore's former cellmate, came by the prison to visit her. Mia Moore had told Ashton to never come back, but there she was. The ladies pretty much talked about Carter Jr. and then Mia Moore told Ashton to become Carter Jr.'s girl so that she could protect him. She also gave Ashton a number to call so that she could get the money she needed to get a place, a car, and clothes, and to look the part for Carter. Breeze brought Aurora to the Diamond Estate. After the property was seized, Estes was able to purchase it back and remodeled a few things. He knew Breeze would someday return. Aurora was amazed by the palace. Somewhere along the way, Breeze decided to stay to finish some family business. So with the money Estes left for them, they had plenty to survive, and eventually Breeze took Aurora to the mall. At the mall, Aurora went to Zara, while Breeze continued her shopping in a different store. While Aurora tried on her outfits, she met a girl named Christy. Christy was actually stealing, but Aurora paid for the item with her outfits and saved Christy from being arrested. So to thank her, Christy invited Aurora to a party. So the girls exchanged info right before Breeze came looking for her daughter. Ashton called the number Mee Mee made her memorize. It was of course Aries, but of course Aries didn't let Ashton know that. Anyway, Aries gave Ashton a time and a location and told her if she was a minute late, it was a wrap. The day of the meeting, Ashton of course packed her 9mm. At the time, she was living in a small one-bedroom on the top of a Chinese restaurant. Either way, Ashton headed out to the meeting, which was on a beach. She wore flip-flops, so it made it hard for her to walk in the sand. So once she bent down to take off the flip-flops, a girl bumped into her, seemingly drunk. Ashton was pissed, but she saw that the girl had dropped the bank card. Ashton picked it up, and when she looked for the girl, she had disappeared. Soon thereafter, Ashton got a call from Aries telling her the money was on the card and she could withdraw it from any bank. Ashton did exactly what Mee Mee told her to do. She bought a nice whip, got a nice condo. Next, she would have to furnish it and go shopping. Either way, she got the car and the whip in one day, and that night she slept in the empty condo because it was the safest place she had been in a while. Charisma, aka Riz, was throwing a pool party that all the ballers attended. Ashton came through and she repaid her old friend for keeping money on her books for 4 years. And then Riz asked her to stay for the party and chill on the next floor in his cabana. The first floor was for the regulars, but the second floor was VIP. Later, Mo and Carter Jr. showed up with their entourage and were posted at the cabana next to Charisma and Ashton. Mo had a snake around his shoulders that terrified Ashton, but Mo flirted with her and ended up putting the snake on her shoulders. Carter Jr. noticed Ashton as well and thought she was his type. Ashton wasn't really feeling Mo because of his arrogance, but she was digging Carter Jr. Even though Mee Mee had given her a test, she was really intrigued by Carter Jr. Once Ashton left the cabana, Carter Jr. and Mo placed a $20,000 bet on who could get Ashton first. Later at the bar, Ashton and Carter Jr. were able to talk, and Ashton liked everything about him because he was just being himself and was very humble. After a while, Charisma came through to let them know that a game of Texas Hold'em was going on the third floor, and the buy-in was $50K. Of course, Carter Jr. couldn't indulge in gambling, but he was accompanying Mo and the crew. Ashton decided to put up her $50K and join. Once on the third floor, there were only a few people up there because the game was by invitation only. Basically, Riz and his crew, and Carter Jr. and his crew, and of course Ashton and a few ladies chosen for decoration. A little while later, a crew of men entered the third floor, one being Loudmouth, who Charisma had to literally check because he didn't know how the men were let up there, being that the game was for invitation only. Carter Jr. and Pappy got up to leave, and a man at the door asked Pappy what was he looking at. Pappy was like, "What?" Then Carter Jr. told him to let him go. That's when Mo intervened and pretty much gave the other dudes a warning. Next thing you know, the dude reached for his waistline, and that's when Carter Jr. clocked the dude. Keep in mind that Carter Jr.'s fists are considered a weapon. Carter Jr. handled a couple more of the dudes, and Pappy finished off the last one. After Carter Jr. and Pappy were done, they noticed the first dude wasn't moving. Charisma came over to check the dude and found out he didn't have a pulse. Charisma told everyone to clear out and made sure to tell Carter Jr. he didn't have to worry about anything. Carter's crew and Ashton took the same elevator down to leave the premises. Once Ashton raced off to her car, Mo told Carter Jr. he would handle all of the witnesses. Carter Jr. never really did parties, women, drinking, or gambling because of his discipline and career. He was just celebrating with his cousin and knew he shouldn't have been there at all. Ashton headed to her condo, shocked and amazed that Carter Jr. was able to kill someone with his bare hands. Once she pulled into her parking garage, she noticed that Mo had followed her. She grabbed her 9mm, got out of her car, and pointed it at him as he was walking towards her. He basically came to make sure that she wouldn't tell anything, and he was completely unfazed by her gun that he eventually took from her. He grabbed her purse and looked at her ID and then threw her things back in the car. Of course, Mo was still trying to flirt, so he invited her to come by the boxing gym the next day to get her gun back. She told Mo that it wasn't her that he needed to worry about. His concern should be the security cameras. Aurora was busy exploring the massive mansion that was her mom's childhood home. She never would have guessed in a million years that her mother grew up so lavish, because Breeze made sure to keep everything modest during Aurora's upbringing. Breeze took Aurora around the home and told her stories about her and her brothers, and was constantly crying. One day when Aurora was standing outside of Breeze's door waiting to knock, she heard her mom crying again. When Aurora entered, she saw her mother on the side of the bed on her knees with the picture. The picture was of Breeze and Zaire, Aurora's dad, that she believed to be dead. Breeze finally showed her what her father looked like. They talked a little bit about him, and then Aurora went off to her room. In the room, she pulled off her pajamas and had on a pink mini dress underneath. She grabbed her backpack and jumped out of the window, headed straight to her ride that was waiting, which was Christy, the girl from the mall. Once at the party, Christy's brother Guy was really feeling Aurora. They flirted, chatted, and smoked a blunt. Inside the apartment, Aurora was asked what did she want to drink, and by her only being 14, she had never had anything to drink. Guy pretty much told her to always choose brown, and eventually he asked her how old she was, and of course Aurora lied and said 18. Her and Guy flirted some more and then went to his car. He asked her to drive and she told him she couldn't. At that point, he knew she wasn't 18. Once in the car, he tried to make out with her and take things further, but after she told him she was a virgin, he knew then that she was extremely too young. She finally admitted to being only 14, and at that point, Guy was pissed. He asked her why was she hanging around his sister, because his sister actually was 18. He made Aurora get out of his car. Aurora felt bad about what had happened with Guy. She went back into the party, embarrassed. Once Guy came in, he took interest in another girl. Later, Guy and Aurora ended up in his bedroom, and she apologized. They talked, he manipulated her, and told her she couldn't tell anyone what they had going on. He was 25 years old, but Aurora was just happy he wasn't upset with her anymore, and agreed to what he was saying. After a little while, he ended up taking her virginity without protection, even when Aurora asked him to use it. Carter Jr. was worried about the man he had killed with his bare hands, as well as the loss of Estes. Mo assured him that he would handle everything. However, Pappy wasn't buying it due to all of the cameras. Carter Jr. realized nothing but bad things had been happening since he came to Miami, and he halfway wanted to go back to the Dominican. Mo went to talk to Charisma about getting that tape from the pool party. When Mo made it to the club, it was filled with Riz's men, all strapped with heavy artillery. Either way, Mo and Charisma worked out a deal serving pills at the party Riz promotes. Of course, Riz had already handled the security tape, but he was intrigued by Mo's offer. The men shook on the deal, and when the waitress came over to get their order, Mo asked Riz was she his girl, and that's when Charisma told Mo he wasn't into girls. Mo told him that was his business. Soon thereafter, Mo was ready to get up out of there because it was starting to feel like a date. However, Riz assured him that he wasn't his type. Mo still needed to link up with Joey to get the package prepared for Riz. He was also supposed to be meeting up with Ashton, but decided that this deal was more important. Mo sat at the small boxing gym early the next morning waiting on Joey to bring him a package. The gym was located outside of Miami and was actually Carter's playing ground. Carter Jr. had invited Mo in hopes of getting him intertwined in the boxing world. However, Mo wasn't feeling that. He had his own plan for Carter Jr., and that was to sabotage him with a steroid that was easily detected in his blood tests and urine samples. Mo's goal was to make Carter Jr. realize who he really was, and that was a diamond. Mo wanted him to come over to the side he belonged on, the side that was in his blood. Joey pulled up right on schedule to deliver the steroids they had got from a black market dealer. Joey also told Mo that they had run out of product at the trap since they didn't have a connect, and Madeira and her men in the pork and bean projects was getting their bag. After Joey left, Mo got a text from Ash that reminded him that he stood her up. It also reminded him of the bet he and Carter Jr. had. He sent Ashton the address so he could finesse her in front of Carter. Mo had already called anonymously to the boxing commission hotline to leave a tip about Carter Jr. He also had filled the Gatorade bottle with the steroid before Carter arrived. He was just hoping that Carter would finish the Gatorade before the members of the boxing commission showed up to test him. Carter Jr. was going at it in the ring, practicing for his fight. Peppy was inside the ring coaching him. However, Mo sat on the bench anticipating Carter downing the liquid after a long round of practicing, and Carter Jr. was dripping wet. Peppy threw him the bottle of Gatorade. Carter Jr. downed it quickly, which caused Mo to clap and celebrate, which made Carter Jr. think he was being congratulated for the work he had just put in the ring. A few minutes later, Ashton showed up and couldn't take her eyes off of Carter. Even though Mo was trying to run game, he noticed that she wasn't paying him any attention and had tunnel vision on Carter. He accepted his defeat, but asked her to hook him up with her homegirls, and she agreed. Soon thereafter, the members of the boxing commission showed up, and Mo couldn't help but smirk. Carter Jr. had been refusing to take Mo's calls since the incident with the boxing commission. Mo and Joey went over to Ocean Drive to meet with Harry. Mo was running out of patience, waiting on Carter, so he went behind his back and met with the Dominicans on his own. After Harry made the phone call to ensure that Juan had actually met with Carter Jr. and Mo, he was then given the okay to do business with them. So Harry told Mo to come back after sundown and they would have the order ready. Mo knew then he would have to break the news to Carter Jr. whether he wanted to be down or not. They were now in business and they were now partners. Joey was amazed about the news as well. Carter Jr. was at his rented mansion on the phone with the boxing commission trying to get them to retest because he knew he didn't juice. There was no use though because they had already banned him for a year. In turn, he lost the biggest bag of his career, which would have been $5 million for the upcoming fight he was preparing for. He began to blame Peppy, thinking he was sabotaged by him. Then he looked at the picture of Estes, who would have been able to help him through the dilemma if he wasn't dead. He thought back on the times they shared and smiled. Then looked at the picture of his parents. Next thing you know, Mo and Joey barged in. Mo tried to convince Carter Jr. to continue the family legacy, but of course Carter spoke against it. Thinking about all the losses their family had taken, he was determined not to be like his father. Mo still didn't inform Carter Jr. of the recent meeting with Harry because he knew Carter would speak against it. Mo and Joey decided to leave and would pick up the order later without Carter Jr. Mo also told Carter that Breeze wanted them to come over the next day before he left. Joey and Mo picked up the bricks from Harry and were headed to the trap house they had right outside of Miami. It was a 2-bedroom home that they kept their work money and guns in that no one knew about but Joey and Mo. After unloading the SUV, placing the 100 kilos on the table, Mo grabbed his pet snake and put him over his shoulders. That's when they decided to stamp their product with the snake. Also, before cutting the product, Joey showed Mo a video of his dad and uncle. Someone had put it on the internet from back in the day. After seeing the video of his father and uncle, he knew he had made the right decision. So he decided to call Carter Jr. to let him know he had used his name to secure the connect. and hoped that Carter Jr. would come on in and get to work as their fathers did. Carter Jr. was at the gym training, thinking about everything that was going on in his life, from the boxing commission to Estez's death to Mo pulling him into the cartel. Later, Ashton came by to meet Mo, but ended up in the ring with Carter playing around. They later went to lunch and ended up sharing a kiss. Carter Jr., who never dated openly, was intrigued by Ashton's natural beauty and natural body. No fake hairline, fake eyebrows, no fake lashes, no fake breasts, no fake waistline or fake booty. She was all real, and he loved her smile. Once they hit the streets in the drop top Lamborghini, he decided to call off the bet with Mo because he didn't want to play any games with Ashton. He was definitely feeling her. Joey was posted at the trap house waiting on a dude from the Pork and Bean projects to come through that was supposed to be doing business with them, but clearly dude was late and Mo was agitated. He took the tardiness as disrespect. When the dude finally pulled up and walked up to Mo and Joey, he explained that the reason for his tardiness was that he was busy with his little shorty he had in the car. Mo asked the boy what was his name, and dude replied, Guy. Mo then schooled him that women do not come before money. Then he asked him to tell the broad in the car to get out so that he would know who this dude was saying his name in front of. So Guy walked to the passenger side window and knocked on it. Of course, the chick didn't let it down. So he went to the driver's side and got in. At this point, Mo was suspect and told Joey that he didn't like how this dude moved. So Mo got up and walked over to the car. The windows was tinted, so he couldn't make out who the girl was. So he went to the driver's side, and once he saw his little cousin with this grown man, he lost it. He snatched her up out of the car and began beating the brakes off Guy, all while asking him what he was doing with the 14-year-old, knowing full and well he was 25 years old. Mo ended up shooting Guy in the foot. Aurora tried to hold her cousin back, but Mo threatened her as well. Mo took Aurora to Breeze and told her what had happened. Thoughts of when Malti kidnapped her played back in her mind, and she went ballistic. Aurora's only defense was Guy was good to her, and she would be able to see that if she gave him a chance, and that she was only having fun. Breeze made it clear that Aurora had no business with that grown man, and she threatened to have him delivered to his mother in a box. She told Aurora she could not leave the house with no one other than the bloodline relatives, and when she did leave, she needed to turn on her locations. Breeze was not about to let her only daughter get pulled into those Miami streets. She told Mo to keep an eye on her. She also warned Mo that there may be repercussions for what he did, and she had seen wars started for less. She also told him she didn't come back to Miami to bury more diamonds. Madea had a garden in the center of the Pork and Beans projects that she tended to every morning for the last 20 years. She got her name from mothering the young boys who eventually became men and joined her army. She had the respect of everybody in the hood. She was interrupted by a man named Tar looking to re-up on Percocet. He slung oxycodone, Xanax, and Percocet and was currently out and missing sales. Thing was, Madea never wanted drugs to ever get into the hands of the youth or pregnant women. And here, recently, a 14-year-old boy was in the hospital seizing because he had gotten a hold of some Percocet, and Madea was told that Tar sold it to him. She continued to try to get answers out of Tar, but he was clearly irritated by the line of questioning and assumptions. All he wanted was his work so he could get to the money. So he got smart with Madea. She stood up from tending to her garden and then took off her straw hat, which was a signal to all her men she had on post surrounding her. They started moving in closer just in case Madea needed them. Tar began to calm his tone and tried to explain that he didn't know how old the boy was. Either way, Madea told him to come through later to get him a plate, and she would have what he needed later. Once Tar left and was able to live to see another day, Madea called Guy over to help her with her greens. He had a noticeable limp, and Madea had already heard he got grazed. Then Guy mentioned that he was going to handle the dude that did it to him. Madea asked who was the guy, and when Guy told her it was a diamond, she told him quickly to leave that alone. Guy was adamant about getting Mo, but But Medea told him again to leave that alone. She did not want those problems. She then made up her mind to visit the city to put an end to this before it even got started. Breeze and Aurora were at a coffee shop having a girls' date out and decided to get coffee after shopping and spa treatments. Soon Breeze was interrupted by an older lady she had never seen before in her life. Breeze was trying to figure out the woman's angle before responding to her. After Ronetta, aka Medea, introduced herself, Breeze scanned the woman's attire and thought the lady looked like $1,000,000. Medea explained to Breeze that she knew her parents and they were thick back in the day. She also mentioned that Aurora favored Taryn, which was Breeze's mother, and that made Breeze less tense. Medea asked to speak with Breeze privately, so Breeze sent Aurora to the bar. Medea then got directly to the point, pretty much telling Breeze that she needed to end this thing before it got out of control. She told her she knew that her nephew was responsible for shooting one of her men. Breeze let it be known that she doesn't have anything to do with what her nephews get into. Medea then told her she was the eldest living diamond and she was in whether she wanted to be or not, and that she needed to end this thing before a war erupted. Breeze pretty much dismissed Medea, and Medea walked out with her head held high, stopping to tell Aurora she would be seeing her around. Breeze then hopped on the phone to call Mo to find out who that Medea woman was and what she was talking about. Leaving from Breeze's and getting the news of the unexpected visit from Medea, Mo was livid. He gathered his boys and headed straight over to Pork and Beans Project. Mo had a chick he was dealing with from over there, so she educated Mo on how Medea got down, so he was fully aware of her goons. Mo drove his own car and his boys trailed him just in case something went south. Once there, he spotted Medea on her knees tending to her garden with her infamous straw hat on. Mo let it be known that he didn't appreciate the unannounced visit to his family, and the conflict between him and God was between them. Medea pretty much told him she only paid a visit to Breeze to relay a message to him about a truce before things got worse. Mo tried to get her to do business with his team, and she refused, saying that they were good, then went back to tending to her garden. Next thing you know, Mo had took a leak right in her garden, and Medea was livid. She held her tongue due to the children being around, but her and Mo both knew this was war. Carter, Mo, Joey, and Pappy were at the barbershop, and Carter Jr. wanted to know, was the situation taken care of with the security cameras? Joey was getting irritated because Carter Jr. was asking too many questions, so he tried to muscle Carter to let him know they didn't answer questions because they ran by Amy. Carter wasn't amused nor fazed. Basically, he was humble and just worried about his boxing career as well as his freedom. Mo explained to Carter Jr. that he worked out a deal with Riz, so that tape was pretty much non-existent at this point. Carter Jr. then asked where was the tape. Of course, Mo didn't have it, but shortly afterwards, Ashton came walking in. Carter Jr. was thrown off because she showed up unannounced looking quite stalkerish, and this kind of annoyed him, although she was a beautiful distraction. Carter Jr. asked her about it, and she said that Mo had posted their whereabouts on social media, and she decided to slide through since she was in the neighborhood. The two of them walked outside, and he pretty much told her to leave so he could finish discussing business with Mo. Ashton left feeling embarrassed. Carter Jr. wasn't used to having a girlfriend or anything like that, so all of this was foreign to him. Carter Jr. went back in the barbershop. He told Mo the bet was off about Ashton, and Mo told him that he had taken her heater the night of the pool party incident, and he had been wondering why she had one in the first place. Either way, Mo gave Carter Jr. Ashton's pistol to return it to her now that he knew they were feeling each other. He also told Carter Jr. he respected his decision on the whole bet thing. They then talked about the business operation he had set up with Riz. Way home, Ashton was definitely doubting herself and felt like Carter Jr. wasn't feeling her at all. She felt bad for the way he dismissed her at the barbershop. Once she was home, she decided to call Mia Moore and let her know that the plan may not work out because she didn't think Carter was feeling her. Before they got too deep into the conversation, she got a knock at the door, and of course it was Carter Jr. Mia Moore was still on the phone listening. However, Ashton gave him two and didn't let him in, and was returning the same treatment he gave her at the barbershop, then asked him to leave. She eventually told Mia Moore she had to go and hung up. Then Carter Jr. handed her the gun Mo had given him, and then he pretty much left. The next morning, Ashton got a text from Riz that read 911, meaning they needed to meet up face to face. So she quickly showered, threw on a bikini and a t-shirt and shorts, and headed out to his club in South Beach. Once there, she paid valet to keep her car up front. When she went inside, she was shocked that it was actually a meeting with Riz and his crew, Carter Jr., Mo, Joey, and Pappy. They were actually there to give Ashton hush money, which she opted not to take in return for her time, because at this point she felt like Carter Jr. and Mo had played her just to keep her quiet. She was offended and ready to leave. Riz, however, did vouch for her and told how they linked up in the past out in Texas. Ashton was becoming more irritated because she didn't want anyone to know her past. She liked to stay anonymous, only focus on today. Eventually, Ashton left feeling very insulted. When she made it to the door, she handed valet her ticket and told him to bring her car. He responded that it wasn't ready, which pissed her off even more because she had paid him to keep it out front. Moments later, Carter Jr. came through the door, tipping valet and telling Ashton to ride with him. Ashton was confused. She really was starting to feel like Carter was bipolar, but she decided to ride with him. They ended up at a farm, and he told her he needed her to help him because he only ate fresh fruits and vegetables, nothing store-bought. At the farm, they met Nas. Carter Jr. had known him since he was a child when Estes first brought him there. Nas was the owner of the farm and ultimately the farmer. He had never seen Carter bring a guest to the farm in all the years he had known him. Nas and Ashton greeted each other, and Nas kissed her on the hand, telling her how pretty she was. He told them to pick only the right fruit and veggies, and that he was going inside to set up something nice for the lady. Carter Jr. and Ashton talked, flirted, picked ripe fruit and veggies, and Carter Jr. was almost caught with his hand in Ashton's pants by Nas. Once done on the outside, they went inside, where Nas had set up a picnic for them, and they also made a fresh pie. After a long day of kisses, flirting, and teasing, Carter Jr. ended up driving Ashton to one of the mansions he inherited from Estes. There, they continued to flirt, kiss, and tease each other, then skinny dipping in the pool. Both of them got extremely turned on, and then Carter Jr. carried Ashton into the dining room and bent her over the dining table, only to realize they had no condoms. On the drive to Ashton's house, he questioned his judgment because usually he had been so disciplined, but here he was almost willing to have unprotected sex with her. I also wanted to eat some of the pie, knowing full and well during training he only ate organic sugar, and the fact that he was riding around with her through the city in a drop-top Lambo. Either way, when they pulled into her parking garage, Ashton began to tease and flirt with him again after hopping on top of him. She also let him know that she had condoms inside of her condo. They went upstairs and had their fun. Afterwards, Carter Jr. took a shower and was ready to head out. He pretty much told Ashton that this was a mistake. He was thinking that being with her would be a burden, love would be a burden, and trust too. She responded that she wouldn't pressure him even if they didn't get it right. She just wanted what was in front of her today, right now. Carter Jr. told her good, because he wasn't trying to sell dreams. He didn't know where his career would take him in 6 months. He didn't know where he would be in 2 weeks, and today, right now, was all he could guarantee. They got that understanding to keep anyone from getting hurt. By the way, the condom broke in the midst of their rendezvous. Breeze was emotional. It was the eve of her father's born day. All she was able to do was cry and drink wine. Aurora came and asked Breeze could she go hang out with Christy, and of course Breeze said yes and offered to take her. But Aurora told her that Christy's mom let her drive occasionally and she was already on her way. Breeze told her to make sure that Christy's mom would be there and to text when she got there. She also reminded her about her curfew. Breeze then noticed that Aurora had on a backpack and asked her daughter
What was that for? And of course, Aurora lied, saying something about her and Christy would be making TikTok videos, so they needed makeup and wardrobe. Once Aurora was in the car with Christy, she stripped down and changed into a snug-fitting mini dress that was black, and then applied her makeup. And as she was taking her hair down, she thanked Christy for covering for her to meet up with Guy. He had been texting her, flirting with her ever since the incident, and she was anticipating seeing him. Christy dropped Aurora off at Guy's condo. Carter Jr. was on his way to an address that Mo had sent him during the drive. He thought about the whole steroid incident. He had questioned Pappy at least 12 times, and Pappy assured him that it wasn't him. Plus, Pappy did the same routine for years right there at his side. That's when Estez's teachings came back to Carter Jr., which forced him to look for invisible threats, which were usually the most dangerous. Meanwhile, while waiting on Carter Jr. to show up, Mo discussed with Joey how he was ready to tell Carter everything and show Carter all of this work that was now stepped on and branded with the snake logo. When Guy answered the door for Aurora, she instantly got butterflies in her stomach because he was well dressed, had a nice line, and was smoking a blunt. But soon thereafter, she felt like something was off about him. As she came on in, she noticed two other dudes playing a game. And that made her feel a little uneasy because he had told her it would just be the two of them watching Netflix and chilling. He told the dudes to go to the back because clearly they were making Aurora uncomfortable. He then told Aurora that they would be leaving soon. She was still uneasy, but then noticed that Guy's eyes were bloodshot. He lit a blunt and tried to get her to smoke it. She refused because she didn't want her mom to smell it on her when she came back. That's when Guy left and went to the back, and when he came back, he had some pills. He told Aurora to take them, and her mom wouldn't be able to detect anything. He did tell her they were ecstasy and that they would relax her, but she still didn't know that much about them, even though she had heard about them. Guy began to rub on Aurora's hair and then make out with her. He took a couple of the pills and in return demanded that Aurora take them too, as she did, almost as if in a trance she thought was love. At the trap house, Mo told Carter everything as well as show him the work, and of course Carter Jr. wanted nothing to do with it. He and Mo had words back and forth as Joey stayed off to the side with his hand on his waistline as he watched the cousins go back and forth. Mo didn't back down, but Carter Jr. ended up packing up the bricks to return them to Harry. However, Mo wouldn't give him the location. So before Carter Jr. left with the work, he told Mo that he would get the address from Auntie Breeze. Mo wasn't expecting that, so he was thrown for a second. But after Mo thought about it, he knew Breeze would be down because she had already been a part of this life. After the pills kicked in, Aurora had turned to someone else. The other two dudes that had gone to the back earlier were now joining in on the rape and torture of Aurora. They also filmed some of the action. They ended up doing all of the unthinkable to Aurora for hours on end, and when she actually woke up, she was laying outside of her mom's estate around 7 a.m. the next morning. She really couldn't remember much, but she knew it was way past her curfew and she had on the wrong clothes. She checked her phone and noticed that her mom hadn't checked on her at all. Either way, when Aurora entered the house, she discovered that her mom was still sleeping and had been drinking wine all night. Aurora headed upstairs to hop in the shower and cry because she was in so much pain and she didn't understand why God let all of this happen to her. But before she made it up the stairs, Breeze interrupted her, acknowledging the fact that Aurora was already dressed to go visit her grandfather at the cemetery. Aurora responded that she just wanted to look nice for his born day. Breeze then asked her what time did she make it in, and Aurora lied and said she was there by curfew. Breeze then told her basically that her outfit was a bit much for her grandfather's birthday and that she needed to change into something more appropriate. Of course, Aurora jumped at the opportunity to finally get a shower to wash some of the guilt, pain, and shame away. The family would be meeting at 9 a.m. at the cemetery. At the cemetery, Breeze and Aurora were the first there. The day was so emotional for Breeze, she barely paid Aurora any attention. Any other day, she would have been on her. Anyhow, Mo showed up first. He greeted Breeze and then Aurora. He knew instantly something wasn't right, but he chalked it up to the
the occasion for now, but made it his business to check back with her later. Later, when Carter Jr. came, he greeted Breeze and then Aurora as well, and he also knew something was off with her. After Mo went up and paid his respects, he read on the tombstone, "Diamonds are forever." And with that, he knew he had made the right decision. When Carter went up and paid his respects, he went and talked to Breeze about the current situation. It kind of caught her off guard, but after sending Aurora to the car, she asked Carter Jr. to repeat himself, and he did loud enough for Mo to hear. Carter Jr. pretty much told Breeze what Mo had done. However, to Carter's surprise, Breeze kind of sided with Mo, because no matter how the deal was made, it was done, and now they had to distribute the product, because in this game there was no takebacks. The only way out was death. Carter couldn't take the dope back anyway because it had been cut. The Dominicans wouldn't have taken it back either way. Attended the get together at the family estate after leaving the cemetery. Breeze was still very much so emotional and constantly crying. Aurora was in agonizing pain in between her legs and on her thighs. She was also spotting and was having a hard time peeing. She had been calling and texting Guy, but he wasn't picking up any of her calls or returning her texts. She also tried to reach her friend Christy, but was getting no response with her as well. She needed to confront Guy and ask him why did he allow this to happen to her, and why was he doing her like this. So she decided to ask Breeze if she could go over Christy's house since the family get together was so gloomy. Breeze told her yes because she wanted at least one of them to smile today. Aurora hopped in her Uber and went straight to Guy's condo. She knew he was home because his car was parked out front, so she tried texting him again only to be ignored. She then knocked on the door. She could hear people inside but didn't get a response. So she knocked harder. That's when the door flew open and Guy was yelling, asking her what did she want and why was she beating on his door like that. She was asking him why did he allow his friends to take advantage of her, and why was he doing her like that. Next thing you know, a woman walked up beside Guy who was stacked in all the right places and asked him who Aurora was, and he responded by telling her it was just his sister Christy's friend, and told the lady to head on to the back while he finished up with her. Then the lady walked away and Guy closed the door and then pulled up the video of Aurora from the night before and said it doesn't look like anyone forced you to do anything. Aurora was shocked to see the footage and noticed she didn't even look like herself, like her soul was gone. At first she covered her mouth in shock and then tried to snatch the phone from him, but it ended up falling and shattering the screen. Guy reached back and knocked the wind out of Aurora and then kicked her a few times in the stomach after she fell to the ground screaming. He told her to get from over there and run tell her cousin about that. Madea had made Sunday dinner for her men as she did every Sunday. They took this day to meet up as well as pay up. She made the announcement that she was going out of town for a day and a half and that Guy would be in charge during her absence. She never let them know what she was up to when she went away like that. Either way, Madea had a son who was attending college, and she never let it be known to him what she did in the streets, and the streets didn't know about him. She kept him in boarding school all of his life, mainly to keep him out of harm's way. She would visit him and they would vacation together, but she never let him come into her world. Anyway, she was preparing to go visit him at the Bethune-Cookman College. The morning she left, little did she know that Mo was watching and telling her. He thought she was headed to meet up with her connect, but once she pulled into the college campus, her secret was revealed. He sat there and watched Madea struggle with groceries and toiletries, and then her son came out to assist her. Mo sat there the entire duration of the visit, which was 6 hours. He watched Madea leave and then pull out of the parking lot. That's when Mo got out of his car with his duffel bag with the snake in it. He also pulled his cap down to cover his face to hide his identity from the cameras. He went to Madea's son's room and pretended that he was somebody named Daryl who claimed his phone was dead and needed to contact his roommate to let him in the room. Jackson, Madea's son, let him in to use his charger that was plugged in at his desk. He mentioned that he had never seen him on campus, but Darrow told him he is usually low-key and spends most of his time at his girl's house off campus. After a few minutes, Jackson noticed Darrow's bag moving, and that's when he told him his pet snake was in it that he has to sneak on campus. Then Jackson asked to see it. Mo put the snake on Jackson's shoulders. When Jackson asked Mo what was her name, Mo responded Dman, which was the attack word for the snake to begin to squeeze. And that she did until Jackson was taken to the upper room. Mo put her back in the bag and left out the same way he came in. He had driven an old hoopty to the college, so as soon as he was back in the city, he had it torched. After the incident with Guy, Aurora went to a diner and sat there for a few hours before she contacted Mo and told him to meet her there. A bruise was forming on her face at this point, so she was too afraid to go home and explained to Breeze once again that she had snuck out and disobeyed her mother's wishes. When Mo finally pulled up to the diner, he flashed his lights to let her know he was there. Aurora told Mo everything, and he told her he would take care of it, but she needed to talk to her mother. He explained to Aurora that Breeze had been through a lot and that she was a gangster. He told her that Breeze did not look like what she had been through, but he assured her that Breeze would understand. Mo ended up blowing Guy's genitals off and put 2 in the back of his dome. The next day, Madeira found out about her son and Guy. She was heartbroken, but soon realized it was all because of the cartel, and it was time for her to strike back. She had her men to flatten Breeze's tires, and one of them pickpocketed her phone, so as soon as school was out, she was there to scoop up Aurora. Madeira told Aurora that Breeze had asked her to come to get her. Aurora was reluctant at first, but after calling her mom and getting the voicemail a couple of times, she decided to go with Madeira. They talked a lot during the ride, and Madeira was trying to get as much info out of Aurora about her family, so she would know exactly what she was up against. They ended up stopping at an ice cream shop, sat there eating and talking for about an hour and a half. Aurora felt so comfortable with Madeira because she wasn't judging her. She ended up giving Madeira more than enough information about her family. When it was time to leave, Madeira told Aurora she should never hop in cars with strangers, and then she shot her dead and told her men to box her up and send her to her mother. The ice cream shop belonged to Madeira. Everyone there was a part of her team, and there were no cameras. Carter Jr. came by to help Breeze with her tires, and when they were pulling into the estate, they noticed a box at the gate with the lid flipping up and down. When they got out to look to see what was inside, that's when they discovered Aurora's body. Breeze lost it. Breeze and Carter Jr. headed to find Zaire and tell him the devastating news. When they arrived at Zaire's home, his wife Kai answered the door, and she did give Breeze attitude. After her and Breeze had words, Kai finally let her in while Carter Jr. waited on the porch. Kai led Breeze to the office where Zaire was. He was talking on the phone and looking out of the window with his back to his office door. Once his wife interrupted him and told him Breeze was there, he looked past his wife and locked eyes with Breeze. Kai eventually left them to discuss their late daughter. When Zaire finally said something, it was Breeze, "You're beautiful." From there, they went to apologizing and talking about how Zaire had gotten his memory back and how before then he would dream about Breeze and their daughter all the time. There were tears and hugs and eventually talks of him returning to Miami. Kai walked back in on the two of them, very much so irritated. She told Breeze she should have buried her daughter by herself, and that's when Zaire's natural instinct to protect Breeze rose up again, and he told Kai she better watch it. Breeze tried to explain to Kai that she didn't come to try to break up their home. She just wanted Zaire to come bury his daughter. She also extended the invitation to Kai. However, Zaire told her no. A few minutes later, Carter Jr. came in, and Zaire thought he was looking at Carter Sr. He embraced Carter Jr. and then asked where was Carter Sr. That's when they delivered the news about his passing. Zaire had no idea, but always wondered why Carter never came back to finish the job Zaire had started. Carter Jr. told Zaire the hotel they were staying in for the night, and then told Zaire that they were leaving the next morning, headed back to Miami on a private jet.
The next morning, they boarded the jet, and Carter Jr. wasn't sure if Zaire would show up or not. However, Breeze assured him that Zaire was coming and that they should wait a few more minutes. After the few minutes had passed, Zaire pulled up and boarded the plane. Once they landed in Miami, Aries was there waiting. She had heard about Aurora and came to let Breeze know whenever she was ready to tear the city down to let her know. After the funeral, they had a family meeting. Polo had resurfaced too after hearing the news. During this meeting, they decided that the cartel was back. Breeze wanted a deer hanging from a balcony by high noon. The team decided to make Carter Jr. the head of the cartel because they knew he could follow in his father's footsteps. Mo got upset because he had been in the streets while Carter Jr. was being pampered by Estes. Mo also mentioned that Carter Jr. wasn't even blood related, which was the same conflict that Carter Sr. was faced with when he came into the cartel. Some of the family thought Mo should continue to lead, and others thought Carter Jr. should take the crown. Either way, Mo ended up walking out of the meeting because he was upset. Carter Jr. was just overwhelmed, frustrated, hurt, confused, and he had tried his best to stay clear of the life his father led. After the meeting, Breeze and Zaire talked about all the things that led them to their breakup, which mainly went back to Zaire's loyalty to the cartel versus his loyalty to his wife. She ended up asking Zaire to leave. Then she went in her room and cried for hours and hours. When Breeze finally woke up to the sound of the storm and glass being shattered, she walked into the living room and saw Zaire there. He had been listening to Breeze cry all night. He ended up patching up the shattered window with the storm kit from the basement. After that, they talked about everything, and Zaire told her he wasn't leaving her now when there was a war going on. He told her he would stay until after the war and then figure things out. They eventually made love. Carter Jr. spoke with Polo, and Polo told Carter that he needed to get his own team who would be loyal to him. He also told Carter that he needed to get in the streets because he really didn't know how the game worked on the street level. Estes could only show him the game from the connect level. After their little meeting, Carter Jr. went straight to Ashton's condo. He really needed comfort in her right now. He had the weight of the world on his shoulders, so as soon as she opened the door, they went at it. No condom, no nothing. Afterwards, he talked to her about everything that had transpired, and Ashton was falling in love with this new powerful side of Carter Jr. that Mia Moore always spoke about with Carter. So when Carter Jr. told Ashton that he needed an army, she had the perfect team to link him up with, which was Riz, the Wolves. She texted Riz to set it up. The next day, Carter Jr. and Ashton met up with Riz to discuss the new business deal and plans. Riz was down, especially after Carter Jr. told him he would give him $1 million up front. Riz agreed and asked Carter Jr. what was the first job. That's when Carter Jr. told him to find out who killed Estes and pretty much to bring that dude back in a body bag. That's when Ashton got nervous and jumpy because she was the one responsible for killing Estes per Mia Moore's orders. She couldn't let Carter Jr. discover it was her. Later back at the condo, Carter had bagged $1 million for Riz. That night, Ashton and Carter Jr. made love for the last time. The next morning, he asked Ashton could she be trusted to take the $1 million over to Riz. And of course, Ashton lied and said yes. As soon as Carter Jr. left, she packed her things and grabbed the bags of money and hopped in her car headed to Texas. Her goal was to link back up with her sisters and never stay anywhere for too long. Was how this book ended. So now my thoughts and opinions. I was shocked to discover that Ashton was the one who took out Estes. For so many years he was untouchable, but this rookie hit the scene and wiped him off the map undetected. The next one is, I feel like Mo is too sneaky and Joey is too trigger happy. Mo seems to be down for his family, but his undertone is too sneaky for me. Almost like his greed for power will make him turn on his family. Next one is, Carter Jr. seems to be a stand-up guy. I wish he wasn't forced into the drug game. I actually wanted him to be able to fight for that $5 million, which was the biggest fight of his career. The next one is, that was crazy how Estes left Carter Jr. just about everything and the $100 million. I don't think Mia Moore should have
ordered Estes to be killed. I think she should have talked to her son first and asked him how was he being treated instead of just assuming that Estes was being cruel to him. Maybe she would have found out that Estes lost his only son prematurely, and that's why he took to Carter Jr. like he did. It looks like it didn't take Aurora long to face the karma of disobeying her mom and older cousins. She was only alive a good month after making it to Miami simply because she was disobedient and doing everything she knew she wasn't supposed to. I was surprised that Breeze never put her up on game though. Pointer, I really don't believe the tape from the pool party got destroyed. I believe Riz is holding on to that for blackmail. It's like common sense. Can you really trust the thief? Carter Jr. and Mo should have known better than that from the gate. It's wild to see fragile Breeze step into her position as queen. I think after losing her daughter and snatching her man back, Breeze will become powerful and super dangerous. Breeze has definitely endured the most, from being kidnapped by the Haitians to serving time to losing her baby to the system to losing her parents, brothers, and now her grandfather and daughter. At this point, she has nothing else to lose, which in turn can make her very dangerous. Next pointer. Carter Jr. and Ashton's love story reminds me so much of Carter and Mia Moore's love story. Either way, I don't know why they don't ever think their actions through. Like, did it ever cross Ashton's mind that Carter Jr. just may want to retaliate against whoever took his grandfather out? Did she ever think that he may not want to sleep with his enemy? Did she ever think that after she stole that $1 million from him that he wouldn't come looking for her or even put $1 million on her head? The next one is, this was another phenomenal read, and I'm sure the series will continue. Let me know your thoughts below. Our next book will be Murder Mamas by Ashley and JaQuavis. This is another book we skipped that falls into the series, so cop yours now so we can get into that. So anyway, guys, thank you so much for joining me in the reading room once again. I really appreciate your time and energy. I look forward to seeing you guys on the next book review. Peace and love. And as always,
DJ Mike C on the track.
Cause that be natural.
Lady D.
Ain't looking tacky. I keep my game tactful.
Yo,
Yeah, I'm so nappy. Cause that be natural.
The infamous.
Ain't looking tacky. Cause I keep my game tactful.
I'm so pretty, I'm so fabu, I'm so natural, it's like it's a taboo. I'm so filthy, got the tattoos, fucking these bitches like I own ragu. On my business with my platoon, getting these minutes like I'm a typhoon. Y'all is jersey on that cartoon, and I'm sitting on top of these buffoons. I'm so nappy, I'm so nappy. All these dudes that wanna get at me, I'm so cultured and I'm happy. Jealous switches wanna come back me, cause I'm comfortable in my skin. End of the day, you lose, I win. I'm so comfortable in my ends, don't care if I make